This walk is starting from London Bridge, and I'm going to walk through Bermondsey and finish at Canada Water. When I asked my son if he wanted to come with me, and I said I'd be walking about 5 miles, he said, "Are you mad? It sounds like you're walking around Everest." So hopefully it won't be that long, but I'm on my own. Here is an art installation by Joe Rush with the ants crawling all over the tube carriage. It's hard to imagine, but Bermondsey in Saxon times used to be a desolate marshland punctuated by a few very small islands, and some of the streets were just causeways to get across to churches. Bermondsey's history began when the Priory of St Saviour was established here under the French monks, and then a wealthy Londoner called Alwinus Child drained the marshes and constructed river walls to stop the Thames flooding the area. And then it was on all that reclaimed land that the monks built an extensive network of buildings. I just wanted to come and look at this adorable inn. How cute is this? If you look closely, you can see that these houses were old warehouses. Ah, look what I found. So here we have Arthur's Mission building, which used to be a Victorian school for destitute children who couldn't afford education. And then if I turn round, the glorious Guinness Trust building. Let me just get out of the road so I don't get killed. So this was an area blighted by social deprivation, and the Victorians tried to improve the living conditions for those living in these slum areas. And the Guinness Trust was founded in 1890 by Edward Cecil Guinness, the great-grandson of the founder of the very famous brewery. And he injected £200,000 into the trust to provide housing for destitute people in both London and Dublin. The trust still continues to look after his work, and they look after about 4,000 properties in London. In the 18th century, this very small park used to be a burial ground for Guy's Hospital. Here's a little plaque about it, saying originally open fields, the land on which most of Guy Street Park stands belonged to Guy's Hospital in the 18th century and was used as a burial ground until it was closed and leased to a builder. So this glorious building on the corner is the London Leather and Hide Wool Exchange. I'll go a bit closer, and all the reliefs around the entrance depict the process of leatherworking, the buying and selling of the hides, and the unhairing of the hide before it's hung up to dry. Let's have a look. So from the Middle Ages, Bermondsey was the main place in London for the manufacturing of leather goods. And mainly it was because there was a plentiful supply of water from the Thames, which was essential for the tanning process. by the end of the 18th century, it was estimated that 1/3 of all leather produced in the country came from this area. But it also was very unpleasant to live next to all the tanneries, as you can imagine. There's one bit that is captured in Dickens' Dictionary of London, and he describes this area as being devoted entirely to skinners and tanners, and the air reeking with evil smells, with many workers marked with many stains, and about them seems to hang the scent of blood. After World War II, however, there was a falling demand for leather goods, and compulsory land purchases made by the local council drove out the industry. So walking along here, there are lots of converted warehouses. And here we have Morocco Street, which is named after the type of leather once produced here. So this was favoured as bookbinding. Morocco was made from goat skin, dyed red, and then tanned to bring up a bird's eye pattern. So at the end of Morocco Street is Bermondsey Street, and this used to be Bermondsey Village, but it was of course swallowed up by the growth of London in the 18th century. But long before this, Bermondsey Street was a causeway for the medieval abbey across the marshes. It's just hard to imagine. This old house, number 78, dates from the 17th century. You can still see the oriel window and then the large attic at the top. Now this I have to try. Right, so here it is. It's got egg foam on top, so I've got to stir that in.
Coffee for Rob.
So this is me trying my Vietnamese egg coffee. It's really nice. It's got condensed milk and chestnut. This is nice. Oh God, it's got in my hair. Oh, what is that in your hair? Oh, don't worry about me, it's just egg foam. This is turning into a disaster because it's quite sticky as well. Oh my God! Oh, they definitely won't like this as an advert for their egg foam coffee. It's very nice though. So this is Tanner Street, obviously a nod to the leather works. And then Tanner Street Park here was originally the grounds of Bermondsey Abbey. Then St Olaf's Bermondsey Workhouse was built here in 1791 and demolished in 1925. this building at number 169 used to be the premises of Christie and Company, the largest hat and cap maker in the world in the mid-19th century. It was this building and the one opposite, which I'm standing under. And during its peak, it employed around 500 people. But obviously the fashion for hat wearing declined, so the company left Bermondsey. It still survives today in Oxfordshire. But the phrase "mad as a hatter" would have some really serious meaning here in Bermondsey, because all the mercury, sulfuric acid that the workers used to mould the shape of the hats caused them to tremble and appear insane. And the phrase was fairly commonly used even before the appearance of the famous hatter character in Lewis Carroll's Alice Adventures in Wonderland. Here we have the Time and Talent Settlement building, and this was founded in 1887 by a group of Christian ladies who wanted to help well-to-do girls use their time and talents to help others. They would do things such as basket work and singing. And then in 1913, the group founded a hostel to house factory girls who were being crowded out of their homes. Next door is the oldest building in Bermondsey, which is St Mary Magdalene's Church, and the original church was built for local people who worked for the Abbey, and the current building dates to about 1680. So here is the former graveyard of St Mary's, and it's now being converted into a park. And one of the tombs here is one for the Rolls family, as in Rolls-Royce. So I'm going to look for that. And here it is. Who'd have thought, eh? So right by the entrance is the old parish watch house, and this is dating from 1810, and this was used by the parish constables who would guard against body snatchers, so anyone attempting to steal the corpses. And body snatching was really flourishing in the capital, and there were a growing number of anatomy schools that needed corpses for dissection. Officially, they were only allowed to use the bodies of prisoners who'd been sentenced to be executed, and they could dissect them. But around the early 19th century, there were only about 50 prisoners a year, so they were running out of bodies, so they used these resurrection men to fill the gaps. So then the Anatomy Act of 1832 allowed unclaimed bodies to be used for the study of anatomy. So here I am in Bermondsey Square, and this was the site of the inner courtyard of Bermondsey Abbey. And an antiques market moved here in 1950, and until 1990 benefited from the ancient law of marche ouvert, which meant that stolen goods could be sold within the market between sunrise and sunset without anyone being able to later challenge a purchaser's legal title. Here at this Turkish restaurant, which is unfortunately closed, you can see the foundations of Bermondsey Abbey beneath a glass floor inside. I'm on Grange Walk, and this formed part of the Abbey complex, and in medieval time goods were transported from the Abbey farm to the Thames. And then just here at number 5 to 7 is the remains of the Abbey Gatehouse, and that's all that's left of the Abbey now. used to be a river called the River Neckinger, and this is where the goods were transported in medieval times from the Abbey Farm all the way to the Thames. It's now a lost river and flows underground. Just going under this railway bridge, and here are the supporting columns, which is quite unusual. And here we have New Concordia Wharf, which was originally home to a 19th century grain warehouse and then became the very first residential conversion in the Docklands. And it's named after a prairie town near Kansas City in Missouri, which is where the imported grain was once stored here. I'm just going to go up the riverside walkway. So this leads to a footbridge running across the entrance to St Saviour's Dock, and this was the outlet for the River Neckinger. So the River Neckinger was believed to have been named after the devil's neckcloth, or the hangman's noose, which was used in past centuries here for the hanging of pirates and criminals. Jacob's Island is mentioned in Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens, and the chief villain, Bill Sikes, hid out there before falling to his death in the mud flats here whilst trying to escape an angry mob. And Charles Dickens writes of how it exists, the filthiest, the strangest and the most extraordinary of many localities here hidden in London. Jacob's Island, the warehouses roofless and empty. So this is Cherry Garden Pier, and this is where J.W. Turner sat and sketched the warship Temeraire as it was being towed to a breaker's yard in Rotherhithe. This is also the site of an old fire station, a river station. Cherry Garden Pier River Station. Corbett's Wharf, right next to the old fire station at Cherry Garden Pier. 650 years ago, King Edward III built a residence here in Rotherhithe, and this building was constructed on a low-lying island surrounded by marshlands. So here are Alfred and Ada Salter with their daughter Joyce, and they were very legendary, beloved figures in Bermondsey. Alfred Salter was born in Greenwich and was a student of Guy's Hospital, and he promoted free medical treatment using modern methods, helped people with TB, educational films about hygiene, and infant mortality fell from 150 to 69 people, and not one mother died in childbirth whilst he was around. And the Salters' life were marred by a great personal tragedy, because in 1910 their only child Joyce Here's a picture of her. She died from scarlet fever because to win the trust and to avoid privilege, they'd chosen to live amongst the disease-ridden slums and have their daughter educated locally, but the cost proved very high. But through Joyce's death, it bonded the Salters forever with the people of Bermondsey. And this sculpture has reflected on this, and it's the statues Dr. Salter's Daydreams, and Alfred sits imagining Ada, Joyce and the cat as they once were in happier days. Just sit next to him for a bit. The Angel pub here dates from the early 19th century, but the original tavern goes back to the 15th century, where it was owned by the monks of Bermondsey, and the pub still contains trapdoors once used by smugglers to evade the landing charges on the Thames Wharf. This is known as the Leaning Tower, and this was the office for Braithwaite and Dean Barge Company, and the barge workers were known as the lightermen, and they'd come here to collect their wages. So this is the start of Rotherhithe Street, and it looks like a little cute back alley, but actually it's 2 miles long and is the longest street in London. I will not be walking all 2 miles of it, but it is very cute. Mayflower pub here, named after the Mayflower ship that left from near here at the start of its epic journey in 1620 to take a group of people to a new colony based in Plymouth, Massachusetts. The captain of the Mayflower was Christopher Jones, and he comes from Rotherhithe, so he's buried here in St Mary's Church. They believe that the ship was dismantled for its timber in Rotherhithe, and so there must be parts of it around. Here is Brunel's engine house. Mark Brunel began constructing the first tunnel in the world to be built under a river. It ran between Rotherhithe and Wapping and wasn't completed in 1843. And this pump house played a crucial role to prevent water from flooding the tunnel. However, the project had loads of problems, including a collapse in which a number of workers died and Mark's son, Isambard, almost drowned. The tunnel was never successful financially, being only accessible on foot. It was full of stalls selling goods under gaslights, and it was taken over in 1865 by railway companies and now forms part of the East London line. Unfortunately, the churchyard is locked, but inside here is the grave of Prince Lee Boo, and it talks about the memory of Prince Lee Boo, who is a native of the Palos Islands, and he departed this life on the 27th of December 1784, aged 20 years old. And this was built here as a testimony to him for his humane and kind treatment afforded by his father to the crew of the ship Antelope, which was wrecked off the island on the 9th of August 1783. And it had been shipwrecked on the island, which is now the Pacific Republic of Palau, and the islanders helped Captain Henry Wilson and his crew repair the ship. And their king persuaded Wilson to take his son, Prince Lee Boo, back to England to receive a Western education. The prince attended a Rotherhithe school here, and his story generated a huge amount of interest. But sadly, he died of smallpox 6 months after his arrival. His fellow islanders didn't learn about his tragic end for many years, and today he remains a famous historical figure in Palau. The entrance to the Rotherhithe tunnel is the Norwegian Church of St. Olav, and there's St. Olav's Court. And if you're wondering why there's Swedish or Scandinavian churches to be found in this area, it is because the docks in Rotherhithe were built in unused marshlands, and during the 18th century the dock was used by Baltic whaling ships and renamed Greendon Docks. It then merged with Surrey Docks to form the Surrey Commercial Docks. So lots of the docks in this area were named after the countries from where goods originated. Russia Dock, Canada Dock, Norway Dock. And so Canada Water was originally a dock, but it's now a lake and a wildlife reserve, and it was built in 1875 and became the main dock for handling all of the Canadian produce. And then just across is Canada Water Station, which is where my journey ends. And I know my son said it was like walking to Everest, and my God, my feet feel like I've walked to Everest. So I'm going to get on the tube and go home now.